Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck tech for you from the new set Phyrexia All Will Be One. And just a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck tech, so there are going to be some expensive cards in there, although I think it shouldn't be too hard to find substitutions for those expensive cards. But before we do that, just a quick reminder to please click subscribe if you enjoy these videos. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me, and we're currently growing the channel, and it helps me a lot. Much appreciated. And today we're going to be talking about Glissa Sunslayer, one of the new commanders from Phyrexia All Will Be One. And if you're not familiar with Glissa Sunslayer, she is for 1 colorless, 1 black and 1 green, a 3/3 legendary creature Phyrexian zombie elf with first strike, death touch, and whenever she deals combat damage to a player, choose one. You draw a card and you lose 1 life, destroy target enchantment, or remove up to 3 counters from target permanent. So Glissa has a lot going for her. To start off, first strike and death touch are an absolute pain to deal with in combat, so she can protect you really well on defense, or she can go on the offense and actually get some amazing triggers. So the first two are just generically good. Drawing a card and losing a life is great, and destroying an enchantment is obviously great as well, because there's a lot of strong enchantments in games of Commander. But what we're going to be building around is that third mode, which is very unusual. Remove up to 3 counters from target permanent. Obviously, sometimes your opponents are going to have stuff that you want to remove, but we have built the deck in a way that we can take advantage of that ability to its fullest, and it's a really cool ability. So the main thing we're going to be trying to do is to play sagas that give us value, and since Glissa can remove counters from them, we can manipulate them in order to get multiple triggers a turn using Proliferate, which we also have a lot of in the deck. And since there are a lot of black-green sagas in which the last mode is not the strongest, we can just keep them around and make sure they don't get sacrificed and keep reusing their abilities turn after turn, which is a very Golgari way to win the game, I'm sure you'll agree. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started with our creatures. We have Agent of Erebos. This card is obviously going to be great in a deck running this many enchantments. Being able to deal with your opponent's graveyards is fantastic, and this can do it repeatedly at no cost for you, so it's really solid. Proto Contaminator is in a lot of my lists lately. It's obviously a really overpowered card, and it fits really well with the theme we're going for with the sagas. Being able to proliferate and get another trigger on a saga is really great. Also, it can just randomly win the game out of nowhere. I was playing this in a deck recently with no other poison or toxic cards in the deck, and I just knocked out 2 players by getting hits in early with this. It's really good. Contaminant Grafter is in there for similar reasons to Bloated Contaminator. We can basically just get some nice little proliferate triggers in there, but apart from that, the corrupted ability might occasionally be online, and when it is, it's just a bit of extra value, so very solid. Doomwake Giant is great in any deck running a lot of enchantments. We are running a ton of enchantments, so we can repeatedly wipe our opponent's boards of small creatures, and if we have a turn where we manage to drop 3 enchantments, say, we can just have a one-sided board wipe. This is really solid. Eidolon of Blossoms is similarly good. It's one of the best ways to draw cards in enchantment decks, so this is going to be great here. Elves of Deep Shadow and Elvish Mystic are both in the deck to accelerate our mana. Now, usually I advocate for running Sorcery Ramp because it just puts the lands into play permanently, but seeing as Glissa costs 3 mana, these are going to be very good in the deck since they're going to ramp us from 1 to 3. And as you'll see later on, we also have ways to use the creatures in our graveyard. Eternal Witness is a staple in Commander. It's going to allow us to return something to our hand. Evolution Sage is going to be pretty good in this deck. We have a lot of ways to get extra lands onto the battlefield, and proliferating is going to work very nicely with our sagas. If we are trying to keep a saga around, we do have to be a little bit careful with the timing with our proliferates and make sure to remove the counters first with Glissa. Ferropede is an absolute all-star in this deck, so just like Glissa, it can remove a counter from a permanent. So that's mostly going to work with sagas, but we do have a couple of other things where it's going to be really nice too. Gloomshrieker is a nice way to return a permanent from the graveyard and still have a decent body. A 2/1 with Menace is actually fine. It's also an enchantment, which is going to trigger all of those synergies. Grim Guardian is one of the ways we can try to finish the game slowly with our enchantments by dealing 1 damage to each opponent at a time. Herald of the Pantheon is going to give a pretty nice discount to most cards in our deck, and then we're also going to get a nice little bump on life every time we play an enchantment, and we do have a couple of cards that are costing us life, so this is nice to have. Hex Parasite is yet another way to remove counters from permanents, and it's also going to get a nice little buff when we do so, so pretty solid card. Llanowar Elves is again another ramp card that takes us from 1 to 3 mana. Nessian Wanderer is a surprisingly underrated card, I think, in Constellation decks. This is going to fetch us a lot of lands, and even though they don't go straight onto the battlefield, it's basically drawing us a card when its ability hits, and if it doesn't hit, that's fine too. It's just going to provide you with some pretty neat card advantage. Nexus Wardens is one of the weaker Constellation cards usually, but we do have quite a lot of cards that cost us life in this deck, including the first ability on our commander, so gaining 2 life for each enchantment is pretty nice. It's also going to block small flyers really well. Nylea's Colossus Colossus is another great way to finish the game. We have a lot of ways to make our commander unblockable or very difficult to block, so with this in play, playing even just another couple of enchantments after it, Glisa can become lethal out of nowhere. Phyrexia, God of Affliction, is really nice in most black-green decks, but in this one where we have an enchantment theme, being able to exile creatures from graveyards to make 1/1 death touch enchantments is super annoying. It's also graveyard hate, and it covers a lot of bases. Sanctum Weaver is going to add a bunch of mana in this deck because we have so many enchantments. Setessan Champion is going to draw us a card whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under our control, and it's also going to grow itself as it does so. Tangled Florahedron is a nice little ramp card that fits into one of our land slots. Thief of Blood is a really interesting card. It can reset all of our sagas and then get a bunch of counters when it comes in. It also absolutely hoses opposing counters decks, so this is a very, very sweet card in the deck. Thrall Parasite is another way to remove counters, and it actually gives us Extort, which can gain us life as well. So it's hitting multiple things we want it to do in this deck. Timeless Witness is recursion that we can use twice. Very, very solid. Vampire Hexmage is a famous staple in other formats, and in this deck, it's actually got the combo. We have Dark Depths in here, so this is going to work really nicely with that. Weaver of Harmony is going to copy the triggers from our sagas, which is super nice. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this card, and it's also going to buff all of our enchantment creatures, so it's actually doing a lot of good stuff. Next up, we are moving on to the enchantments, which are the meat of the deck. We're starting off with Audacity. It's very similar to Rancor, and it's also going to draw us a card when it dies. The only difference is we don't get it back, which is, you know, a downside, but drawing a card is very good. Azusa's Many Journeys is going to work really nicely by letting us play an extra land. It works really well with Nessian Wanderer because you can find a land with it and then immediately put it into play if you stack the triggers correctly. Then the second one can gain us 3 life, and if we don't want it to flip, we can just keep it bouncing around, gaining us 3 life or giving us an extra land. But if we do flip it, it's still pretty good on the other side. Finding the Old God is one of the best ones to keep bouncing back and forth because it's going to destroy a non-land permanent every time and then search for a forest and put it straight into the battlefield. So it's going to repeatedly ramp us and destroy the things, and the third mode we don't really care about at all, so we're fine just having the first and second activate over and over. Elephant Grass is a really nice one. Cumulative upkeep cards are quite good in this deck, but most of the cumulative upkeep cards in black and green are not great. This one, however, is. It's going to give us absolute protection from black creatures while it's out. No black creatures can attack us at all, and then each non-black creature is still going to have to pay 2 mana to attack us. So it's very, very solid here because we can keep it around with such little cost. Elspeth's Nightmare is just like Binding of the Old Gods, an excellent saga to keep activating. It's going to destroy a creature with the first mode, and then it's going to make somebody discard something with the second mode. So you can constantly know what's in your opponent's hand. You can destroy multiple things turn after turn. Very solid. Enchantress's Presence is just another way for us to draw cards. Jugan Defends the Temple I really like, and we can keep using the first and the second ability over and over. So it's going to make ramp and give us counters, which are both great in this deck, particularly since we have Proliferate. And then eventually when we have enough modified creatures, we can just flip it over and it'll become an absolute beast on the other side. Kendrick's Transformation is a great way to deal with creatures, particularly commanders, and it's an enchantment as well, which is fantastic. Phyrexian Scriptures is absolutely crazy in this deck. We can protect one of our creatures by making it an artifact, but actually if we want to, we can protect multiple of them by removing counters from it. We can also just immediately proliferate it to destroy everything on the spot. So just a very, very flexible card. We can keep it going slowly, building up value, which is a bit riskier, or we can just go for the immediate board wipe. Rancor is going to work really well with our commander, making sure that Glisa connects. The Cruelty of Gix is another one that's great to activate time after time. We can make our opponent discard a card, and then we can just get a Grim Tutor every turn, and we can just get the best card in our deck and put it into our hand. With Proliferate and all the removing counter stuff we have going on, it's super easy to get this going. It's really, really sweet. The first I Ruin Games is a great one to recur over and over because we don't really care that much about the last mode, which is a gold token, but all the other modes are pretty solid, particularly drawing 2 cards, so we're pretty happy to keep triggering them over and over. The Long Reach of Night is one that I can see myself not re-triggering too often because the other side can be really solid, but that being said, getting them to sacrifice a creature or discard a card every single turn is really good. The Mending of Dominaria is fine. It's one of the weaker sagas, but it's still pretty solid, so we're going to be milling and returning a creature card from our graveyard to our hand with the first 2 modes. That's good to keep doing. And then when we're finally ready, we can just recur all of those lands that we've dumped into the graveyard and also shuffle our graveyard into our library, which is pretty nice. The War in Heaven is a great one to do over and over, so we're losing life and drawing cards, and we want to activate that mode as much as possible until we're ready to go to mode 3. Mode 2 we don't really care about too too much, but mode 3 is really nice here for recurring stuff from our graveyard. The Weatherseed Treaty is going to provide us with a little bit of ramp and some blockers, but if we want to, we can keep ramping to get more and more basics into play. As a side note, in this deck, we have quite a lot of ways to find basic lands, so if you build this deck, do try to include a higher number of basics than you normally would. Utopia Sprawl is a nice way to get some extra mana as an enchantment, which synergizes with our deck, and it also ramps into our commander on turn 2, and Wild Growth does the same. Next up, we are moving on to artifacts, and we have Fire Shrieker, which is going to give Glisa double strike. Double strike means double the triggers. That's pretty solid. Helm of the Gods can make Glisa absolutely huge, or any one creature absolutely huge. Lightning Greaves is a little bit of protection and haste for Glisa, so she can attack out of nowhere and is harder to remove. Lithoform Engine can double up on Glisa's triggers. It can also actually copy our sagas and give us multiples of the same saga, which is really nice. Power Conduit allows for a lot of shenanigans. It can remove counters from sagas at instant speed. It can do all sorts of cool things in this deck, and it can also get our Proliferate train running by putting a +1/+1 counter on a creature. Soul Ring is just excellent ramp. Staff of Completion is ramp that is also going to allow us to proliferate and draw cards, and it does cost a lot of life, but we're gaining a lot of life in this deck. Strionic Resonator is going to allow us to repeat triggers from our cards. This can work with sagas or with Glisa, which is very solid, and Swiftfoot Boots is just more protection for Glisa. Moving on to instants, we have Abrupt Decay to deal with small problem permanents and say no to blue mages. Beast Within is going to deal with anything on the board, which is great. Hagra Mauling is a removal spell that doesn't take up a card in our deck by being a land. Heroic Intervention is going to allow us to protect our board of enchantments from unwanted attention. Infernal Grasp is good unconditional removal. Malakir Rebirth can protect Glisa if somebody tries to remove her. It's very nice to do at instant speed. Terra Sunder is going to deal with an artifact or enchantment, but if we pay a bit more, it can just deal with anything, again at instant speed. And Windgrace's Judgment is going to deal with one permanent for each of our opponents, which I think is absolutely great value for 5 mana. For sorceries, we have Balagad Recovery to return something from our graveyard to our hand. It also counts as a land, which is nice. Damnation is a board wipe. We do need a couple of these. Titania's Command is going to work really nicely in this deck. We need life gain. It provides that. It can search for 2 of our utility lands, which we have a lot of. It can just make 2 bears if we need to, and then it can put counters on our creatures, which we can then proliferate to swing for lethal. For Planeswalkers, we have Vraska Betrayal's Sting. Proliferate is obviously great in this deck. She also comes with removal, and if we get her up to 9, we can actually just kill someone on the spot, which is really sweet. And finally, we're moving into our utility lands. We have Access Tunnel to make sure Glisa doesn't get blocked. Dark Depths, which is going to work really, really nicely with all of our removing counters effects. All of the Bandit Lord can give Glisa haste, which is really nice. It can also give haste to our other creatures, which can sometimes come in handy. Nesting Grounds can work really well as another way to remove counters from our sagas. We can even put a counter from one saga onto a different saga to instantly trigger that saga's ability. Very solid. And Shizo Death Storehouse makes Glisa really hard to block by giving her fear until end of turn. I really like that. So there you have it. This has been our Glissa Sunslayer deck tech. What do you think? Are there any things you would change? Any additions that you think I missed? Please let me know in the comments section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care. Woo!